And welcome back, guys. So as I mentioned in the previous lesson, I'm going to be building a Mossy rock shader network. And you'll find all of the texture files we're going to be using within the source images, section 7 and Mossy rock. That's if you want to follow along. So I'm just going to pull this guy off to the side so that I can drop and drag in things quite easily. First things first, as always, we need a victim, and our victim is the faithful sphere. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go create a new material on him. I'm going to go to Arnold shader. This window is always excessively long. And then we're going to go into Arnold surface, which is great. And then of course we would need our light source like we normally do. So I'm going to be inputting the physical sky so that there's a little bit more color variation and not just a white void. So I'm going to do that guy. Select it, and as we normally do, we put it on its own layer and place it as reference, and then of course rename the layer, and we can go call this physical sky. We need to do the underscores because this window doesn't do the underscores automatically. And then booyah, great. The sphere, we can just go call it Mossy rock geo. We can also delete the history and all that good stuff, so it's nice and clean here. Now with that all done, we can go and open up our hyper shade. All of you should know this window by now quite well. I'm going to go change the material viewer to Arnold, and also I'm going to close off all these create options because I prefer having a larger work area, as you guys know by now. And then also I would like that grid, so I'm going to just click that guy so I can see a grid. Then middle mouse click and drag our shader here, and then do our network. I want all the connections of you guys. Right, now we have this, and now we can go call this Mossy rock matte, and this guy is Mossy rock surface. So now let's go start dragging in some files, shall we? So the first two I'm going to drag in is our diffuse and our ambient occlusion. See, there is the ambient occlusion, there is the diffuse. Move this guy up a tad, and then we need to layer those guys on top of each other. So we're going to be using a layered texture. We can just call this diffuse mix, because we're going to be mixing these two texture files together. So with that still selected, I'm going to middle mouse click and drag the ambient occlusion over to the layers here, and then I might as well do the diffuse as well. I'm going to remove this green layer, take my ambient occlusion, and then remember guys, we're going to be multiplying it over the normal rock texture. And we can also do alpha's luminance. It just adds a little bit of extra to it. Now I can take the out color and plug that into base color. Now as you can see in our material viewer, our material has some texture files in it. We are making progress. So the next thing I want to add is some roughness. So there's some specular highlighting and all that good stuff. So I'm dropping in the rough. Now the cool thing about this is we can always use alpha and then plug it into specular roughness, and it does what it's supposed to do. You could also just use, if you want to use the color channels, you can open this guy up and you can just use the R channel. It does exactly the same as plug in just the alpha. That is just a little trick that you can use if you want to slap in colors like that, and it does the same thing, because there are going to be places where certain nodes doesn't accept an alpha. But that is like very rare circumstances, but so just so that you know, that is a thing that can be done. So specular roughness, drop that in there, wait for the material viewer to update. This guy is great where it is. Now I want to go in and add our little bit of cool textures, in the sense of adding a little bit of grit feel to our material. As you guys know, we use our displacement map in this procedure as well. You do not really need the displacement map for this. You can, and that's great. So now that we have our two surface distortion materials in here, so we can get some cool feelies and change in surface texture, we need to add our two bump maps as we do. So bump map 2D. So this one we're gonna rename to normal because it's for the normal map, preferably spelled without commas. We change the value in here to tangent space normals, and we can now do the same thing as I mentioned before in this guy. We can grab the color and we can grab the red channel and drop it in here. So I'm going to do that just to show you guys how we can use it. Now, if we want, we can just plug in the normal map straight into here, and we're going to get a little bit of surface variation, but we would like a little extra to it. That is why we add the displacement map into the equation. So I'm going to make another 2D bump, and this is going to be, we can just call this bump because it is going to be a traditional bump. We can go plug that bump value in, and now we need to connect these two nodes. And as you guys know, we're going to go and select connection editor, and then this guy we're going to load on the right. Then we want the out normal, so we're going to load this guy on the right. And when we need a little bit more extra information so that we can plug it in, and that needs to go into normal camera, click my close. I want to collapse that guy up. Now I can go do that just again for my own sanity. In the squiggly lines I can do that, and now we have that connected as we normally would connect it, which is great. Now the last thing we would need to add is the physical displacement map, which we add into our surface shader. So I'm going to go displacement map, click the little file node, click the little node and then go to file so that we can go and add a file. Let's go call this displacement file. Well, not files, because we're only plugging in one file. And then we go look for that image, Mossy rock displacement. Now we have that in there like we're supposed to. Now again, we need to go through and make sure our file types are recognized correctly. As you guys can recall, all the grayscale ones and the normal map ones we need to set to raw, and the ones that add to color we can leave at sRGB. So I'm going to go into the ambient occlusion here, make that a raw file, and also alpha's luminance. Great. The color diffuse we leave at sRGB. Then the rock roughness, we need to go tell it it's a raw file. Turn off the filter type. Just want to make double sure I've turned off the filters on these guys as well. Off. Great, that is off. It's also something that adds to like the specular value. So I'm going to do alpha's luminance on that guy as well. The normal map, we want that off, and we want that raw. Our displacement map that we're using in that little bump chain, change that, and we want it raw. And then we can also add the alpha's luminance. This guy, we want that off, and we want that raw. And this one we don't want alpha is luminance. So now we have our network set up like we wanted. So now we can actually start doing our little test renders, which is exciting. So let's do our first official test render, shall we? I'm going to make this thing a bit smaller just so that I can have it open alongside a little test render window. So I'm going to go to Arnold. I'm going to go to open Arnold render view, and then I'm going to click play. So it starts rendering. The first initial render takes a bit of time because Maya generates a bunch of text files, as you can see, text files with the information that we plug in here as text files. Every time you change something in the properties, it adds it to these little text files, which then it associates with the texture file. Now, as you can see, our first initial render is quite disappointing. It doesn't look like we've done anything in the sense of displacement and stuff, but this is where we need to kind of overshoot the displacement for it to actually start taking effect. I'm just going to leave this window open, and I want to do it on the mesh itself. So with the mesh selected, let me just go, I'm going to put this window on my other monitor. So in my mesh, as you guys know, we need to go to Arnold. We need to give it some subdivisions. So we go cat clock, and let's go add 4. As you can see, still nothing has happened. But if we go do some debugging, and we can go to renderer, debug shading, and we go to wireframe, you can see Maya is actually subdividing the mesh. If we take cat clock down to 1, you can see there's the lower resolution. So nothing's really happening in that sense. If we go to normal map, nothing is being used like it's supposed to. So let's go turn that off. So we back to this. And now we need to put these these guys into overdrive. So we're going to go into displacement attributes and also auto bump we want to enable. Now this is where we put it into overdrive. So we're going to change the height. So let's go try 2. As you can see, nothing is really happening. Let's go push it up some more, maybe some 5, and then add a little 1 in here, and then a 0.5 in there. So we can see it's still not doing anything on the mesh level. So now we need to go and do it on the material level. So I'm going to just drop this guy down to a 1 because I don't want to blow out the mesh. So I'm going to go back in here and go here. And there's that little displacement, and we can go in here, and here's another scale we could use. So if I bump that up to a 2, see if that's done anything. Nope. Let's put it back to a 1. And then we have our Arnold options in here. As you can see, we have that same parameters in here. So let's try a 3. Still nothing. Now, this is one of the examples where we need the out color to be plugged into displacement because the alpha is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. I'm going to open this guy up, delete that connection, take the red channel and plug it in, and we should be able to see something happening. And as you can see already, we're getting some displacement because the geometry has changed shape, which is now getting exciting. I'm going to take this window off to the other side. I want to go do this on the mesh level. So height, let's go push it up to a 2. And as you can see, we can start seeing some deformation. So let's go blow this out to like a 5. And now we're starting to see some hectic overhangs and stuff, which is very nice to see. And this is what we are looking for. And now if I go and do debugging and I go to wireframe, you can actually see the mesh is subdividing and we're seeing the displacement taking place, which is super cool. Let's go take this guy to like a 7. Now we're getting some hectic displacement. And if you want, you can push up the number of subdivisions to like a 5 if you feel that you need it. In certain areas we might, so we can go on 5. Another thing we can try and do is edge length, where Maya goes and basically subdivides where it needs to, but we're getting the same result. So I'm going to leave it to just auto for it to figure it itself out. And we can also say smooth tangents, so we just get a nicer and cleaner result. And go back to renderer. Let's pop this window off. We can go to basic, and now we can see that nice deformation without the distraction of the wireframe. Now we can see things like occlusion that we plugged in. We can see our normal map doing its job. If we want, we can overdrive the normal map as well. So with that enabled, let's bring back our shader network. Let's go find our normal map, which is this guy, and we can go change its depth to like a 3, and it adds a little bit of extra information. So if we go 0.05, as you can see, the surface doesn't have that grit to it, and we can go bump it up. Let's see what a 5 gives us. It adds a little bit more crispness to the surface, which is fine. And we can also play with the bump here and maybe bump that up by a 2, try a 3, 6. It's not adding anything, so we can leave it back down to a 1, which is nice. Now with all those settings done, we have a nice looking mossy looking rock. We could go in and change the hue and saturation of the color map to get more punch from the greens, but as a starting point, this is a great place to end off with. As you can see, we got all that cool mossness happening. Everything is looking like it's supposed to. Let's go do an actual render, and it should look exactly the same as it did in the preview. There we go. We got some shadowing happening because of this overhang, and there we have our mossy rock. So with that, I'm going to end this lesson off here, and I will see you in the next video where I'm going to be explaining what you need to do as a little assessment or practice thing for yourself. So catch you in the next lesson.